Hey guys, hope everybody's doing well. So here's what we got today. So this is ASVAB Level 1 practice test, and so we have 20 questions. And so there's 4 levels overall, and so we just base this exactly how our app works, right? So in our mobile app, uh, there are 4 levels, and that just kind of gives you a guide as far as like what you should look at first, right? So you test yourself out on level 1 first. If that looks good, then move on to level 2. So, anyways, the way that I would do this if I was you is in the description, there are the 20 questions. So I would go and answer those first, then come and watch the video to see how to go ahead and solve the problems and see how you did. So obviously you can just watch the video and watch me go through them all, but you have a much better sense. Sometimes you watch somebody else do it and you're like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. But when you have the question yourself, it's a little bit more difficult. So that's what I would do. And below the questions, we have links to specific topics on videos that we have, right? So there will be like a link and it'll be specific that it relates to question number 3 or whatever. Okay. And as I said, we do have a mobile app. It's free to install. It's really a lot more interactive and engaging to use than doing it this way. But I think this is a good way to get a sense of where you're at and how much you need to study and everything. Okay, so question 1. Let me get my pen here. Okay, so when we have negative 36 plus negative 18, so we're adding negatives, and that really means we need like some kind of like a number line here. So, all right, so if we say this is negative 36, as we go this way, right, then maybe down here would be like negative 46, right? So when we're subtracting fractions, or when we're subtracting numbers here, right, is we're going this way. So it's going to be a bigger negative number, right? So what you're really going to look at here is, so 36 plus 18, if we add those two together as if they weren't negatives, that's 54, and we put a negative on there. And so that's our answer. For this first one here is negative 54, but just remembering when you're adding 2 negatives, right, it's going to be a negative number that's bigger than either of the 2 numbers. Okay. And so I'm going to have to do a lot of back and forth here to get to the next question. Perfect. Okay. Okay, common denominator. Okay, so some of these, there are a few questions here on level 1 where we're like, so this is easier than a question you would actually get on the ASVAB, but it's important that you have this concept down. So if this concept confuses you at all, it's important to go through these. And for example, in the app, so we have like 20 or 30 questions that just go over testing you on common denominator, which you're gonna need, especially for like adding and subtracting fractions that we'll get to in a minute. That will definitely show up on the ASVAB math. Okay, what is the common denominator of 1/4 and 1/3? Okay, so we got 1/4 and 1/3. Okay, so what you're going to be looking at, just for simplicity's sake, is you got a 4 and a 3. Okay, and so we can't, like, we are adding these, we couldn't add these two fractions together like this, right? We can't just add them up and say it equals 2/7, right? 1 plus 1 is 2 and 4 plus 3 is 7. We need the denominator, which is these bottom numbers, to be the same. Okay, and so what we're just going to do is multiply the two together. 4 times 3 is 12, and that's the common denominator, b, right? So if that makes sense, if you got that, great, right? So for a lot of people, like, yeah, of course I know how to do common denominator, but there are some people who struggle with it, and then it makes the rest of the math stuff really hard. So anyway, that's how you do common denominator. Just multiply those two denominators together, the two bottom parts of the fraction. Okay, solve for x. All right, so we'll write this one out so it's a little easier to look at. Okay, so this is going to involve cross multiplying. 1/6 equals x over 72. Okay, and so sometimes like a good question is like, what kind of a score is good? Like I would say, especially like for level 1, so this is the 25% easiest math. At least that's what most people think. And so I would be thinking like you need to get about 80% correct, right? To feel comfortable, because the other stuff will be a little bit harder. That's what I would be shooting for. Okay, cross multiply. So that just means you sort of take the numbers that are on the diagonal and multiply them together. Right, so we get 6x equals 72. Right, and we just divide each by 6, so we can just have x by itself, because we're solving for x. And then we just need to know what 72 divided by 6 is, and that answer is 12. Also remember, for ASVAB, no calculator, right? So you need to be able to do these kind of things in your head, right? So we're going to get to this in a second, I think. Figuring out what 72 divided by 6 is a challenge. Is that something you really need to be practicing numbers like that, so that you're comfortable being able to divide those. If it takes a minute, that's not a problem, but we want to be able to know how to do that. Okay, next one. Okay, so YouTube doesn't let us write the exponents like the way a normal person would. That requires a slight amount of coding. So we have to write them like this, like with those little carets. So you're going to see that in all of these practice tests. And then I'll just write it out when I do the video. Okay, so we will x to the fourth plus 2x to the third divided by x squared. Okay, so probably everybody would think this is by far the hardest question we've seen so far. Okay, but this one fits into distributive property, right? And so what it means is that we have to go x to the fourth divided by x squared plus 2x to the third divided by x squared. So we're dividing both of these elements, one right here, one right there, by the denominator, x squared. Okay, so when you divide exponents, you just subtract them. Okay, as long as the base is the same there, right? So right here we have x to the fourth divided by x squared. You just subtract 4 minus 2, and we end up with x squared. Okay, and then we have a plus, right? Because there's a plus right here. Now circled pretty much everything. Okay, and then we have 2x to the third divided by x squared, right? And so we have just that 3 minus 2. So that's just going to be an x, or an x to the first. So x to the first and x are the same, but on a test you'll always just see it as x. And then we have that 2, right? So it's x squared plus 2x is the correct answer there. So answer D right here is the one that we want. All right, moving on. Okay, so this is like a remainder type question. Okay, so Johnson needs to divide 112 people into 5 groups. So we got 112 people into 5 groups as evenly as possible. How many are in each group? Okay, so what they're basically saying is that 112 doesn't divide into 5 evenly, right? And so how many does it, so what does this equal, right? So if we go through this process, okay, so let's check it out. So like if we take this number right here, 22 times 5 equals, we'll go and go through this, 5 times 2 is 10, and then 5 times 2 is 10 again. And let's see, so what does that actually come out to be? I'm missing a 1 here, right? Okay, so 22 times 5, sorry about that math problem there. 22 times 5 is 110. It's impossible to read that, 110. Okay, and so then we could say 112 divided by 5 is 22, but then there's a remainder, right? Because it only equaled 110. So 22 with a remainder of 2, let's say, for now. Right? Or if you wanted it to be a decimal, it would be 22.4. Okay, but there's 22 groups of 5. Yes? And then there's 2 people left over, right? And so that's actually our answer there, is B. Okay, so you can go and do it the way that I did right there, or you can just do the 112 divided by 5 and find that it equals 22.4, or 22 and 2/5, whatever you like. Means the same thing. And then that's your whole answer. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so this is another example of, so all the other questions, unless I actually specifically mention it, then they are questions exactly like you'll see on the ASVAB. This one is simpler, but again, as far as being able to divide, multiply whole numbers, is if you look at this and this is confusing at all to you, 54 divided by 9 is 6. Right, so there's our answer, B. If that's confusing to you at all, is you need to be going through like some basic flashcards kind of things of dividing numbers like this. You know, what's 81 divided by 9? Things like that. You know, answer is 9. Right, so you got to be able to consistently do that. If that's confusing for you, and if that's not, you know, something that you just locked into your memorization, a lot of stuff that shows up later is going to be really hard, and it is worth your time to go ahead and do that. If you feel like I already have this down, great. Right, it makes the test a little bit easier for you. So within the app, we have sections that are just in level 1. That is just doing things like this, so you can zip through a ton of them and get the practice that you need if you need to work on this. Okay, moving on, question 7. Okay, so now we get into actually adding a fraction, or adding 2 fractions, right? So remember when we did common denominator? That skill now comes into place. So adding fractions, that is definitely a question you'll see on the ASVAB. You can assume that you will see it. Okay, 1/3 plus 3/5. So very similar to what we did with the common denominator, right? Is we need to get these numbers to be the same. Okay, and so what we'll do is, okay, so you take 1/3. So 3 times 5 is 15. So we want the denominator to be 15 on both sides, and you can see all the answer choices here are all out of 15. Okay, so it's pretty clear you want it to be 15. Okay, start with 1/3 in terms of how do we do this. So our rule is, okay, so we want that bottom number to be 5, right? Because 3 times 5 is 15, right? To get this. Okay, and that means this top number also has to be 5. Okay, that's called the numerator, right? And 1 times 5 is 5. Okay, so this is going to be 5/15 now. Okay, and then we do the same thing for 3/5. Okay, so to get this number to be 15, then it needs to be 5 times 3, right? Not times 5 anymore, because that would give us 25. All right, so then we got 15 on the denominator, and 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, so now we have our 2 fractions that we want, 5/15 plus 9/15. Okay, and then once we do this, so now once we have the denominator the same, we just carry it over into the final answer. And we add the 2 numerators, right? The 5 and the 9. 5 plus 9 is 14. That's our answer. Okay, so that's how you do adding fractions. Subtracting fractions, you do exactly the same thing. It's just at the end you subtract rather than add, right? But you find the common denominator and get the fractions to look like that exactly the same way. And we can see here, answer D is 14 out of 15. Okay, so there's question 7, 14 out of 15, 14/15. Okay, dividing fractions. Okay, so with dividing fractions, we need to know that when we divide fractions, we turn it into a reciprocal and multiply. So what does that mean? Okay, so we see first we're going to do the 3/4 divided by 1/3, and we'll worry about 1/4 in a minute. Okay, so when it's 3/4 divided by 1/3, right there, yeah? What we're going to do is we take that 1/3 and we flip it. That's reciprocal. So rather than it being 1/3, it's now 3/4. over 1. Okay, that might seem weird to you, but that's just the rule, and that's what you have to do. So 3/4 divided by 1/3 is the same as 3/4 times 3 over 1. Okay, and then we don't have to worry about any common denominator stuff when we're multiplying fractions. We just multiply the stuff out. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 1 is 4. Okay, there's our answer for the first two, for 3/4 divided by 1/3. So we're just going to carry, and then we're going to do the same exact thing again, because we got to divide twice, right? So now we have 9/4, and then so we've got this 1 over 4 right here, okay? And again, we're going to flip it, right? So now the 4 is on the top. 4 was the denominator, now it's the numerator, and the 1 is now the denominator, or the bottom part of that fraction, okay? 9 times 4 is 36. 4 times 1 is 4, okay? And if we divide 36 by 4, we get 9. And you can kind of see, like, if multiplying and dividing any kind of numbers is a little foggy in your mind, is you can already see where it starts to cause problems, right? Because I had to be able to be comfortable with the fact that 9 times 4 was 36, and that 36 divided by 4 was 9. So I had to do it twice there right at the end just to come up with this answer. Okay, so if that stuff is a little scratchy for you, that's what you need to do first, right? Probably seems like you want to be able to jump right through it. If it's not scratchy for you, great. But probably repeating myself, but it is important to build that skill first. It doesn't take that long, right? To build that skill first, if it's something that just slipped through the cracks when you were in school, get that stuff done first. All right, on to question 9. 1/5 of 40. Okay, so this is an of question. So when you see of, think multiply. Of means times. Okay, so all they're doing there is saying, what is 1/5 times 40, and we'll say 40 over 1, right? Okay, then if you just sort of multiply that out, 1 times 40 is 40. 5 times 1 is 5. 40 divided by 5 is 8. Okay, that's all you got to do there. Again, making us know how to divide. Want to be comfortable with that kind of division. It'll show up a lot. Okay, that's all you do. Again, the key point here, when you see of, that means multiply. Okay, question 10. All right, so again, we got that little caret, and that means squared. So we're just asking what's 11 squared, right? And so really they're just asking what is 11 times 11. So really we would like to be comfortable with any two numbers up to 12. Okay, so 12 times 7. We'd like to be pretty comfortable with being able to get to that answer pretty quick, right? And again, no calculator. If you use the calculator, you'll get the right answer here, but you won't be allowed to use it on the test. So what was the point? Right, so there we go, 11 times 11, 121. That's our answer. Okay, so now we have multiplying and dividing where the numbers are some are negative and some are positive. And again, we have these division skills that we're working on, right? Okay, so let's just go take it one at a time. So negative 36 divided by 4. So 36 divided by 4 is 9. And when we divide, so we have a negative here, and while it won't say it, is essentially this is positive, right? So regardless of which one's on the bottom, which one's on the top, when there's one negative and one positive, the answer is always going to be negative. If they're both negative, then the answer is positive. 2 negatives makes a positive. That's a common math term. And if they're both positive, then it's positive. Okay, so if they're different, the answer is negative. If they're the same, positive. Okay, so that gives us -9, but we're not done yet. And then it said times -9. So -9 times -9. Okay, so there we have 2 negatives, right? Negative, negative. 2 negatives makes a positive. And then we're just multiplying 9 times 9. That's 81. Okay, there's your answer. And there's our answer. Okay, next one. Okay, word problem. Lots of people have struggled with some of these word problems. In Palm Springs, California, one day it was 119 degrees Fahrenheit. So I always like to write the stuff down as I'm reading it. If you like to read it all first and then go back, that's fine. In the Gobi Desert, a temperature of negative 50 was recorded. Okay, what is the difference between the two temperatures? So whenever we see that word difference, a lot of times in math it's a key word. What is the difference between the two temperatures? Difference means subtract. Okay, so I started with 119 minus, and then we have negative 50 here, right? Okay, minus negative 50. So really there's testing on this double negative, right? So when you have two negatives, that means they turn into a positive. And then we just have 119 plus 50. If you add those two together, we get 169. There it is, answer C. Okay, so there it is. Difference means subtract. Whenever you see that word, difference, what is the difference? That means subtract. And two negatives makes a positive. Okay, so we sort of did this stuff a little bit ago when we were dividing fractions, right? When we were dividing fractions, that meant the second one we need to find the reciprocal, which was flipping. So reciprocal just means flip them. What is the reciprocal of this? 1/3. Okay, that means flip it to that, right? So what was on the bottom went to the top. What was on the top to the bottom. 3/1. And when any number is over 1, it's just whatever that number is at the top. So 3/1 and 3 are exactly the same thing. So there's our answer. Answer choice D. Okay, and then another, like I think we did this back at the very beginning with number line type stuff. Okay, subtract, or I think we added two negatives. Here we have, okay, so we start off on our number line. So it's -8. Okay, and then -8, right? So it's going to go 8 that way. Okay, that way, as opposed to thinking that if it was 8 minus 8, you would come up with 0. But when it's -8, then you're going 8 to the left, so 8 more negative, and it ends up with -16. Answer C. Being able to do the subtracting negatives and some basic number line type stuff will show up. Almost for sure you'll get a question on that. Okay, so that's the end of the math part of the level 1 questions. And so try to remember, I don't know if you guys know this about how the scoring goes on the ASVAB, is you have two math sections that are each worth 25% of your AFQT score, or your ASVAB score, and then you have two verbal sections. So one is called paragraph comprehension, which is what we're about to do, and then the other one is word knowledge, which is basically like some vocabulary type stuff. So we'll go through that and some tricks on how to go about answering those questions. But try to remember, so a lot of people who are struggling with the ASVAB are struggling with math. And so while certainly if you're struggling with math, it's going to hurt your score a lot, and doing things like what you're doing right now will help you. Just try to remember 50% of your score is this verbal stuff, right? And so a lot of people think they're fine on that just because it's easier than the math. But remember, like if you were doing really great on the verbal parts, you've already got yourself at a 50, if you got everything. So try to remember they're important and add to your score also. For the other sections of the ASVAB, like science or mechanics or something like that, is those just help you qualify for jobs. So if you don't care about any job in science, you can miss every single question and it will not impact your score. Your score is these 4 sections: 2 math sections, paragraph comprehension, word knowledge. Okay, they're each worth the same amount. They're each worth 25% of your score, those 4 sections. That's what determines your score. So now if you do want a job in science, then it's definitely worth spending the time to get get the knowledge there because it will help you qualify for jobs as you enter the military. Okay. I'll probably say that in every video just to make sure everybody knows that. So it's important to know what you're studying for. Don't waste hours on science if you don't care about science. Okay, let's read this. The public school system in America. Wait a minute. Before you do any of these like paragraph comp questions, read the last sentence. Try to figure out what they're asking for. Okay, because they don't always ask for the same thing. Okay, so the tone of this passage is what? Okay, so we're looking for tone. Like, what is it that they're trying to convey? Sometimes they'll ask for specific questions. That one's a little bit more general. The public school system in America is undergoing national crisis, with school budgets being cut, plummeting standardized test scores, and less qualified teachers available. Our children may be in real trouble. American schools are also falling behind many other industrialized nations. Okay, so what usually, this happens a lot, where if there's one word out of the four that you're not sure exactly what it means, it's probably ambivalent. Okay, so usually, if let's say that's the case, perhaps you know what ambivalent means, and perhaps you don't. Okay, I'll tell you what it means once we work through this, but skip over that. A lot of times people see the word they don't know and they just pick that, like, that must be it because I don't know what it means. So go through your answers first. Okay, answer A, worried. Does this person sound worried? I would say yes. And so I would say there's a very good chance that's the answer. But let's look at the other choices. Answer choice C, angry. There's nothing in here that sounds angry, right? It sounds much more like concerned or worried, right? So we'll cross off that one, right? Angry. Answer choice D, sad. Maybe a little bit, but it seems to me like worried is a much better description of what this person is talking about than sad. Like worried would be describing somebody who, like, I hope things don't continue in this way, otherwise then something bad's going to happen. Like that is what this sounds like. Sad doesn't really involve that. Sad is usually like, my girlfriend broke up with me or something. Like it's something that's already happened. Okay, so I would eliminate those two for sure, and then you'd be stuck with ambivalent or worried. Okay, so ambivalent, what it means is more like mixed feelings. So this person is not describing mixed feelings. So if you know what ambivalent means, you can cross it off and then you can be sure the answer is worried. If you don't know, given how much worried really does seem like the right answer, is I would pick it anyway, right? So if I didn't know what ambivalent meant, because there will be most likely, a few situations where you don't know exactly what all the words means. Okay, if you have three that don't seem like the right answer, then I would pick the one I didn't know. But if you have one that really seems correct, just go with that one. So anyway, that is the answer. That is answer A, worried. Okay. And then we're into some word knowledge stuff here. Okay, so it's basically vocabulary. Which of the following words does not belong in the group? Okay, so usually we're trying to figure out how to eliminate some answers as we go about trying to pick these out. Okay, so our choices are protein, fat, dairy, carbohydrate. Okay, so you got to think carefully before you answer this one. A lot of people get this kind of question wrong. So the one that doesn't belong is dairy. Okay, why is that? So protein, fat, carbohydrate, those are all types of macronutrients involved in food, so they're all very similar. Where dairy, like you could have, in many cases actually, like fat, protein, and carbohydrate possibly are a part of a dairy product, right? But dairy in and of itself is different than the others, right? And so because of that, the correct answer choice is dairy. So a lot of times, people a lot of times look at something they're not sure and they just guess real quick. So try to look at them, see how they're categorized, because obviously they're all, associated with food. Okay. We're almost there. We got 4 left. Which of the following words is an antonym for opposition? Okay, so before I even look at the answer choices, I'd like to have sort of like a guess on my own, just so those answer choices, sometimes they can confuse you. Okay, so synonym means like it's similar. Antonym is more like opposite. Okay. Um, so for opposition, so like if we're talking like sports or something, right? The other team is opposition, right? So antonym would be like same team, similar, something like that. Like that's the kind of answers I'd be looking for. Okay. Um, so antagonism would really have nothing to do with opposition and certainly doesn't mean anything close to the same. So I'll say no for that one. Again, this happens a lot where they throw in this word puffery, right? And so there's a decent chance some people don't know what puffery means. Okay, so we're going to skip that for the second. Okay, and we're just going to leave it and see like what are the other answer choices. Okay, answer choice C, complement. So complement and like what we were thinking was like similar or same team, something like that. Not so much, so we can eliminate those two. And then answer D, agreement. Okay, so that's pretty good, right? So similar, same team, uh, agreement. So if we're in agreement, we're kind of thinking similarly. Yeah, that's pretty good, right? And so I would be pretty happy with that if I didn't know what puffery meant. Now, if you know what puffery means, then it makes it a lot easier, of course. Um, right? So puffery is like to compliment or praise, which is not right, very similar to this one, right? This one was compliment. Puffery basically means to compliment. Okay, that can make you sure that compliment is not the right answer if you know what puffery means. So then it's obvious that agreement is the one you go with. Again, similar to a couple questions ago, if you were, at least we should be able to eliminate antagonism and compliment for sure. Okay, and then if we're left with puffery and agreement, at least you're down to 50-50. Given that agreement really seems right, is I would just say, okay, I don't know what puffery means. I'm going with agreement. But at a minimum, at least we've got it down to a 50-50 chance that you get it right, as opposed to if you're just guessing 25%. Three more. Deceive most nearly means, okay, so we have cheat, defend, pay, disobey. Okay, so if I'm trying to deceive somebody is I want them to believe something that's not true. Uh, Cheating does a lot of the same stuff. So initially, like I'm thinking, okay, cheat has a very good chance. Let's go through the other ones. Defend. That doesn't make any sense. There's no way that's the right answer, right? Defend does not mean the same thing as deceive. Pay makes even less sense. If I'm deceiving somebody, I'm not paying them. So cross that one out. And then disobey. That one's a little closer, right? So again, we should have at least got it down to 50-50. So it's possible that in the effort to deceive somebody, I disobeyed them. But it's also possible, right? And this is how you kind of want to think it out. But it's also possible that I disobeyed somebody, but it wasn't to deceive them. I told them I'm not going to do what you said, right? I just disobeyed you. Like, um, and so in that case, it only works some of the time, right? And so because of that, I would cross that out. However, it's harder to come up with an example where I cheated, but I didn't try to deceive you, right? Perhaps you can come up with an example, but it's a lot harder than the disobey example. And so anyway, the correct answer is cheat, but that's the thought process. And that's really what we want here is don't try to memorize these questions because like it's certainly possible that the exact same question shows up, but the concept, and so in this case, the concept is how we go about thinking through this, especially how do we deal with it if we know what three of the words means, but not the fourth, and how we think through these answers. That's really the important part. Okay, two more. They listened intensely to the eulogy. Okay, so in this question, so we look to see are there any answers that we can get rid of, and my sense is if you didn't know what eulogy meant, that it would probably be pretty hard to eliminate any of these answers. So when you don't know what a word means, another thing you can look for is like, are there two answers that mean like basically the same thing? So if they mean basically the same thing, you know, it's very hard for only one of them to be right. Yeah. And so then you can usually eliminate both if they are extremely similar. But, you have spoken tribute, mournful poem, lawful declaration, related sermon. If this is just one where you just have to know what the word means, right? And spoken tribute is a eulogy. So, if you're getting caught where you feel like there's a bunch of words here that I'm not familiar with, or like I've heard them but I can't really say what they mean for sure, is really the best thing you can try to do is try to focus on doing some reading every day, right? So try to pick something that you think is interesting, right? Don't just start reading classic literature or something, unless that's what's interesting to you. But if it's about the military, like a military blog, that's very useful. Um, because there are going to be a bunch of military terms that show up in vocab or in vocab, word knowledge. Okay, last one. Okay, and so this one, sometimes you'll have this where there's a sentence. And so sentences are nice because they can give us some clues as to what the answer is if we're not sure what the word is that they're asking for. Okay, so in the following sentence, what does the word paradox mean? Okay, so, whoops, get my pen back. Paradox is what they're asking us. Okay, so if you already know what paradox means, great. If you don't, let's see if we can figure it out based on the sentence. Although it may seem a paradox, okay, that's the word we're looking for, some studies have shown that employees who have opportunities to nap at work are more productive than their colleagues who choose to work and forego the napping. Okay, by the way, this is a completely made up thing. So don't start napping at work and tell your boss that, you're going to be more productive now. It's completely made up. Okay, so some studies have shown that, okay, so you have some employees who nap at work, and when they're saying that they're more productive than those who forego the napping. Okay, so that's the basic situation that is being described, and then they're asking, what does the word paradox mean? So we'd think as we're reading this that it's surprising, right? Something like that. Okay, so let's look at the answer to see if we can find anything that sounds like surprising or not what we would expect, something like that. Okay, a contradiction. Okay, so as you read that, that's probably it. But let's look at the other answer choices. Standard. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. That's nothing like surprising, unexpected. Conclusion. Again, no, that doesn't sound like surprising or unexpected to me. And fundamental. Also no. Okay, and based on that, we come up with our answer of contradiction. Okay, so that is the end of level 1, right? So there were 20 questions here. Feel free to leave comments if there's things that still don't make sense to you. Again, there are quite a few shorter videos. The way the app works is all those shorter videos that we have linked at the bottom is within the app. So when you're answering questions, we're able to figure out like where you're weaker and where you're stronger, like where some of your knowledge gaps are, and then recommend specific videos to you as you're using the app. Without the app, is then you just have to kind of figure it out for yourself as far as like questions that you missed. Maybe the one of the videos makes sense, right? And the value of that as opposed to this is that those videos go into more details where there's several examples, right? So if it's something where like I did one example and it makes a little bit more sense, but you still need more help, is those videos will have like 2 or 3 different examples. A lot of times that helps to really get that concept locked in. All right, and I will also put the links for the level 2, level 3, and level 4 practice test, so you can find those if you want to go to those. All right, thanks. Have a good day, everybody.